Hello from the Dukascopy TV studio in Geneva. We are talking about FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and the management challenges with Luc-Olivier Suter. He is manager from Chappuis Halder and Company. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks, good afternoon.
So for individuals, the FATCA regulations have been going into force 14 days ago at the end of June this year, 2015. And so what has been done for individuals so far?
So for the individuals, what we mean by that is we're talking about the accounts detained by individuals in comparison to accounts detained by companies or so-called entities. So for the individuals, the banks had to first prepare all the processes and the policies in order to determine what are the clients, meaning are they American or are they non-American? And on the 30th of June, what they had to do is to ensure that all the accounts detained by individuals that they have in the bank have this classification. The bank can now tell you whether all their accounts are American or non-American. And there is a third category in there which you don't necessarily want to be found in, is the non-consenting accounts. So the non-consenting accounts are accounts detained by people who did not really participate actively with the bank to provide information on their US or non-US status. So those persons might eventually be reported to the American tax authorities, the IRS, in order to be taxed, or at least for the IRS to conduct investigation on those people.
Mm-hmm. There is a second part of the FATCA regulations catalog. This is concerning non-individual accounts, which is going to be in force in 1 year. So what has to be done for these entities?
So for the entities, the process is slightly different. For individuals, it's the bank's responsibility to determine whether the client is American or not. For entities, it's the client that has to tell the bank what its classification is. The IRS has given a set of categories where the entities can select how they want to be classified. It's basically a tick-the-box exercise. But in terms of management, it changes the way the project is managed, because for individuals, you go into your file, you determine if your client is American or not. For the entities, you have to obtain the documentation in the first place in order to be able to go on with the process. So if your client do not understand the purpose of sending you this information, these documents, you cannot go ahead with the process. And eventually, it could have impacts for your clients in the future who could be reported to the US tax authorities. So the problem is slightly different. In terms of management, it changes the way you have to manage the project. Mm-hmm.
So that's the regulation. So many people would ask, so now what's the impact on the management of banks? So, and what are also main challenges? Could you give us an overview?
Yeah, so the thing is, FATCA is considered as a tax project. It's tax, it's regulation. So people say, well, it's about the tax departments and they take care of it. Well, technically, it's not exactly like that, because it has a deep impact on the entire way the bank is managed. I'm going to give you a couple examples. For example, when you want to open a new account, you have, in the past, you could just open it, obtaining a set of documents. Now, you have to obtain new documents. You have to ask new questions to your clients. You have to pay attention to small details, which could make you think that your client is actually an American citizen. So it changes the way you open new accounts. It makes things a little more complicated. Another example is the central file of the banks, where all the documents are taken and processed into the systems and where they're controlled. There, you have to have specific processes, specific procedures, specific knowledge, specific training, and even specific teams or tools in order to process these new documents. What do you do when you receive one of those specific IRS documents? Well, that's a good question. And as long as you haven't set up all this process around that, you're not able to process that correctly. Then, obviously, on tax departments have to be able to take the withholding on some specific accounts or to report to the tax authorities specific information. So they have to change the way they're working on a day-to-day basis. And eventually, another big issue in the banks at the moment is around the IT infrastructure. Everything that concerns the bank's systems. You obviously have to modify them, to upgrade them, in order to be able to gather and capture this American FATCA information. Otherwise, how can you manage the bank if you don't know who is an American client and who is not? So all the IT infrastructure needs to move and to be updated. So these are huge challenges which cost quite a lot of money to the banking industry at the moment. So basically, FATCA is changing the entire environment and is changing the way the bank are doing business. You can't just do business as you did it 15 or 20 years ago. Now you have to change the world and change your thinking from non-FATCA to FATCA environment.
Indeed, sounds very complicated, the processes, but what should banks make out of this? So what are the consequences?
Well, it depends. It's a double-edged sword. On the first hand, if you look on the banking industry, obviously it's got a negative impact on profitability of banks. Because all those new processes, procedures, IT infrastructure, specialists to be hired, cost quite a lot of money to the banks and therefore make the profitability of the banking industry lower. However, I think you have to be thinking in a positive way, and managers have to be able to see the future. And if you take a strategic perspective on FATCA, you see that for the banks, the first ones which will be able to implement FATCA in a swift and efficient way will definitely, and I'm convinced about it, have a competitive advantage on all the others. So if you look only at profitability on the short run, definitely it's a bad perspective. If you look at what you can make out of it, definitely there's something to do.
Luc-Olivier Suter, thank you very much for being here today
welcome.
And sharing this information with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And thanks for watching. Do make sure to keep clicking back on the Dukascopy TV website for latest updates and exclusive interviews. Have a great day and see you next time.